Good afternoon to Madam Hidayah. I'm Danashri and I'm going to explain on the introduction and literature review of the research article titled Effects of Intellectual Capital Information Disclosed in Annual Reports on Market Capitalization. So this study was conducted by Osama Abdul Rahman, Anam Abdul Hamid Fatima, and Abdul Rashid Hafiz Masjid, and was published in the Journal of Human Resource Costing and Accounting in 2011. So now let's begin with the background of the study. Intellectual capital, or can be referred to IC, intangible assets, such as employee knowledge, skills, innovation, and organization process that help a company create value. Unlike physical assets, intellectual capital is not always fully reflected in financial statements. As a result, there is often a difference between a company's book value and its market value. Previous studies suggested that when companies disclose more information about their intellectual capital in their annual report, investors have greater confidence in company. So this can lead to a higher market value and market. However, most of the studies were conducted in developed countries, and there was also very limited evidence from Malaysia, which is an emerging market. So because of the research gap, the authors wanted to investigate whether the intellectual capital disclosure also affect the market capitalization of companies listed on Bursa Malaysia. So now moving on to the purpose of the study. The main objective was to examine the relationship between intellectual capital disclosure and market capitalization among Malaysian listed companies. The researchers compared firms from 2002 and 2006 to see whether this relationship existed over time. To ensure that these results were more reliable, they were also considered several control variables that may influence the market capitalizations. So these variables include book value, net profit, firm size, and leverage. So next, for the literature review, the authors reviewed previous research and found that most studies reported a positive relationship between intellectual capital disclosure and market value. So one reason is that greater disclosure reduces information asymmetry, meaning the investors receive more complete information, can make better investment decisions. So the review also showed that earlier research mainly focused on developed economics and Sri Lanka, while Malaysia has received very little attention. So this highlighted the need for further research in the Malaysian context. In terms of the evaluation, one strength is that its literature review is that it uses relevant previous studies and acknowledge different research findings. However, one weakness is that the review is relatively brief and it covers a limited range of studies, or so it include more reasons or broader research. So to conclude, this study was conducted because there was limited evidence in Malaysia on whether intellectual capital disclosure influences a firm's market capitalization. Therefore, the researchers aim to examine this relationship among companies listed on Bursa Malaysia. Thank you. I will now pass to the next speaker for the presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, madam. My name is Muhammad Hafiz Jazimin Fadullah bin Haji Al Mifazlin, and now I will be presenting research design and procedure. So the research adopt a quantitative research approach with a correlation research design. This approach was used to examine the relation between intellectual capital disclosure and market disclosure and market capitalization among Malaysian listed company. For data collection, the research collected data using archival sources. The first source was company annual report, which were analyzed to identify the intellectual capital information disclosed by company. The second source was the Bloomberg database, which provide financial information needed for the study, including market-related data. And then for sample selection, the study started with a population of 456 companies listed on the main board of Bursa Malaysia. From this population, only 91 companies were selected as the final sample using two sampling methods, which is stratified sampling and systematic sampling. And for study and measurement period, the research examined data from 2002 to 2006 to measure intellectual capital disclosure. The research created a 101 intellectual capital disclosure index. Each disclosed item was given a score of 1, while undisclosed items were given a score of 0. Those scores were then combined to calculate the extent of intellectual capital disclosure, or EICD. A higher EICD score represent a higher level of intellectual capital information disclosed by a company. Moving on into the next slide, which is variable and data analysis. So the main variable in this study were EICD and MCEPI. So EICD, or the extent of intellectual capital disclosure, was the independent variable, while MCEPI, or market capitalization, was the dependent variable. The research also include control variables such as book value, net profit, firm size, and leverage to consider other factors that may affect company value. So for data analysis, this researcher used several statistical methods. So first, descriptive statistics such as mean, mode, and median, and standard deviation were used to summarize the data. Next, Pearson correlation analysis was conducted to examine relationship between variable. And finally, multiple OLS regression analysis was used to test whether intellectual capital disclosure had an impact on market capitalization. Additional analysis and limitation. The research was also applied the Van der Waerden transformation to improve data normality. They conduct separate regression analysis for 2002, 2006, as well as pool regression using a year dummy variable. However, the study had some limitation. The research did not report to conducting a pilot study, and there was also inconsistency in the report number of annual report. So overall, the research used quantitative method and regression analysis to investigate whether high intellectual capital disclosure contribute to higher market capitalization. That conclude my part on the research design and data analysis. Now I will pass to the next presenter. Thank you.
So, Assalamualaikum and very good afternoon, Ms. Chika. My name is Noor Ain Putri Rizgania. So, today I'm going to be presenting about the findings and also critical evaluation of our article that we found from Emerald website. So, let's take a look of the finding of this study. So, the regulation analysis shows that three governance factors, which is the number of board meetings and also role separation between chairman and also the CEO and also the board size. So, they have a really significant impact on corporate performances. So, in contrast, independent directors, governance ownership, and also the director ownership were not found to influence the performances, which the company size was only marginally significant. So, this helped to suggest us that Malaysia's corporate governance reform, particularly those in the MCCG's 2012, which are proving effective in shaping accountability and also help to improve the outcomes. So this study has also a several strengths, which is it used a really large sample of 742 non-financial listed companies, which applies a really clear regulation model and also helps to provide a new evidence that governance reform are actually working. So, however, from the strength, we also have a limitation, which is the analysis only covers for 1 year, which excludes the financial firm and also may not actually capture the long-term effect of the ownership traits. So the key takeaway here is that governance really reforms matter more than the traditional ownership patterns in Malaysia. So next is the conclusion, implication, and also recommendation. So, in conclusion of our study, the article really demonstrate that the Malaysia corporate governance reform really start to enhance their accountability and also performance, while the influence of traditional ownership structure is diminishing. So the implications are really clear here, which for the companies, it means they are start to prioritizing the internal governance practices such as board structure and also role separation inside the work culture. So for the policymakers, they help to reinforce the importance of continuously refining the MCCGs to strengthen the transparency. And for the researchers, this helps to highlight the need to expand the scope of analysis to include the financial firms and longer time periods. So the recommendation that we came out from our study today is for the future research across multiple years, they can try to use alternative performances measures beyond the return on equity itself. So and try to considering the cultural or the political factors that may shape the governance effectiveness. So overall for today's presentation, Malaysia governance reforms are proving fruitful, but a broader and also longer term studies are needed to confirm their lasting impact towards the company. So that's all from us today. Thank you.